But hold on, before you go dropping your land bars to buy some rune-covered JPEGs, there's more to this story.
As always, things aren't as simple as some bearded dudes with axes and their shiny silver treasures.
There are a few wrinkles to this history, and it can get pretty messy. For starters, yes, Vikings did use silver coins, but it wasn't necessarily as currency.
Remember those scratched up silver chunks I mentioned? Well, turns out Vikings weren't just cutting corners, they were kind of reinventing money. They took those little bits of silver, weighed them carefully, cut them up, and traded them based on weight. We're talking about the good old days of PRE decimal currency. So basically a wild system that worked sort of like this.
Instead of nickels and dimes, Vikings had units like skillings and pennies.
These were tied to the weight of silver rather than being official coins. And then there was the Arik Bloodlix saga.
If you haven't heard of him, let me catch you up.
Arik was a Viking leader from the 9th century, known for his brutal raids around the Baltic Sea and his affinity for killing people.
But here's where things get complicated.
He landed in what is now Finland and started buying land from local tribes using silver coins. But when he tried to pull the same trick in the Slavic lands around Kiev, he ran into trouble.
The Slavic princes accused him of cheating them on the weight of silver. They demanded more silver for the same land. Fast forward a few decades, add a bunch of pillaging and violence, and boom, you've got a ballad called the Orkneyinga saga. This saga, which is basically a Viking history book, claims that Eric cheated the Slavs by shaving off some silver. Now, if you're wondering why this matters, well, it throws a wrench into the whole Vikings were OG crypto miners idea.
Turns out their dealings with silver might not have been as pure and decentralized as we thought. History can be messy, eh?
It's full of good ideas, bad ideas, and all the chaos in between.
And who knows, maybe those old stories about silver and Viking shenanigans aren't completely accurate.
After all, a lot of what we know about Vikings comes from sagas written down by Christian monks who, let's just say, weren't exactly fans of these big-bearded heathens.
So while it's fun to think about Vikings raiding for Bitcoin and burying treasure in cold storage, remember, history is rarely black and white.
Now, here's where things get extra fuzzy. The Vikings didn't invent silver, nor did they first use it as currency. Silver has been around since at least 3000 BC, thanks to some asteroids kindly providing the raw materials.
Ancient Greeks and Romans were also into silver coinage, and many empires before and after used it for trade.
Also, the dirham, those famous inscribed silver coins that Vikings gobbled up like Halloween candy. They didn't appear out of thin air. The word dirham itself traces back to a Roman coin called a denarius. The point here is that silver and the idea of using it as a form of exchange were already floating around for centuries before the Vikings showed up. Okay, let's talk about mining.
Vikings, sure, they swung hammers and went on plundering quests. But they weren't exactly creating a decentralized network that verifies transactions and issues new coins. Those concepts are the brainchild of computer science geniuses. Lots of coffee, and more importantly, the internet. But here's where it gets really interesting. While Vikings weren't mining crypto per se, their methods of acquiring silver do share some similarities with how miners work today.
For instance, take raiding, that classic Viking pastime.
Raids often targeted places like monasteries and trading hubs.
Monasteries because they held lots of valuables and were generally not defended, and trading hubs because, well, people gathered there for trade and usually had nice things on hand. This quest for valuable stuff is different from the idea of mining, where miners seek out hardware and software that can solve complex problems and help verify transactions in return for newly minted coins. Both activities involve searching for something valuable. In the case of raiding, it's treasure and valuable items.
And in the case of mining, it's the next block in the transaction chain.
And then there's trading, which was another major way Vikings got their hands on silver. Trading routes connected them with various cultures across Europe and beyond.
They bought silver from folks in the Middle East and other parts of Europe, bartering goods from their own regions in return.
This is kind of like how miners today set up rigs to mine crypto.
They establish a setup that allows them to compete in the race to verify blocks of transactions.
Both activities, trading and mining rigs, require investment and strategic positioning to be successful. Miners don't just set up shop anywhere.
They look for areas with low electricity costs and stable internet connections. Similarly, Vikings wouldn't set up trading posts in random forests.
They'd likely choose spots along rivers or coastlines that were accessible and had high foot or ship traffic. So yeah, while Vikings weren't technically mining crypto, their practices do share some surface-level similarities with how mining works today.
They sought out resources, invested time and effort, and took risks to acquire silver, which they saw as valuable.
Now here's the thing. Back in the day, Vikings and their contemporaries didn't have a global network of computers verifying transactions and minting new coins. Instead, the value of silver came from a consensus built up over centuries.
People trusted that the weight of the coin represented a certain amount of silver, and that this agreement was widespread enough to make the coin useful in trade. They relied on the reputation of the ruler or merchant who minted the coin to ensure its purity and weight.
In essence, they engaged in a sort of PI blockchain record keeping. Agreements and reputations played a bigger role than cryptography and computer algorithms. In the end, it is important to acknowledge that the term crypto encompasses a lot of innovations from the early days of bartering and coinage to modern blockchain technology. Each step in the evolution of money and exchange has built upon earlier ideas and innovations.
So while the Vikings might not have been mining Bitcoin or Ethereum, their practices do offer a fascinating glimpse into the early days of exchange, risk-taking, and the enduring appeal of shiny, heavy things.
Thank you for watching.